The day I discovered my grandfather's will had been altered, I was standing in the lobby of Mercer Publishing, watching as my debut novel climbed to number 3 on the digital bestseller board. My phone vibrated with a text from my brother Nathan. "We need to talk. Now." I ignored it, savoring this moment I'd worked toward for a decade. The second text was more urgent. "It's about Grandpa's estate. Pierce and Associates just called." I should have known something was wrong from the tension in Nathan's voice when I finally called him back. My grandfather, Edward Reynolds, founder of Reynolds Literary Empire, had passed away 3 weeks earlier at the age of 82. The legendary publisher had built his company from a small printing press in his garage to one of the most respected names in literature, and now, apparently, there was an issue with his will. "They're saying Grandpa changed it," Nathan said, his words clipped and precise as always. "2 months ago. He left you 49% of Reynolds Literary." "What?" I gripped my phone tighter, stepping away from the celebrating publishing staff. "That's not possible. We were each supposed to get 25%, with the remaining 50 going to the board." "Well, clearly he changed his mind," Nathan replied, that familiar edge of bitterness creeping into his tone. "The lawyer wants us both in his office tomorrow at 9. I could almost see my brother, tall and imposing in one of his expensive suits, pacing his corner office with its view of the Manhattan skyline. Nathan had been groomed since childhood to take over Reynolds Literary. As the oldest grandchild and only grandson, it had been assumed by everyone, including Nathan, that he would eventually run the company. I had chosen a different path, determined to make it as an author without trading on the family name. I'd even publish under a pseudonym. "I'll be there," I said, already dreading the confrontation. The next morning, Pierce and Associates occupied the entire 32nd floor of a gleaming skyscraper. Nathan was already there when I arrived, sitting stiffly in the reception area. He barely acknowledged me with a curt nod, his eyes fixed on his phone. "Olivia," he said by way of greeting, not looking up. "Nathan." We'd never been close despite our mother's best efforts. The 10-year age gap meant that by the time I was forming coherent sentences, Nathan was already interning at Reynolds. While I'd spent my childhood with my nose in books, dreaming up stories, Nathan had been learning profit margins and acquisition strategies at our grandfather's knee. Mr. Pierce ushered us into a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows. "Thank you both for coming," he said, shuffling through documents on the polished table. "As I mentioned to Nathan yesterday, your grandfather made some significant changes to his will shortly before his passing." He slid copies of the document across the table to each of us. I skimmed through the legal jargon until I reached the relevant section. "To my granddaughter, Olivia Grace Reynolds, I bequeath 49% of voting shares in Reynolds Literary Empire, with the express hope that she will bring her creative vision to the company that has long been the cornerstone of our family legacy." Nathan's inheritance remained at 25%, with the remaining 26% divided among longtime board members. "This is outrageous," Nathan said, his voice dangerously calm. "There must be some mistake. My grandfather would never have done this." Mr. Pierce adjusted his glasses. "I assure you, Mr. Reynolds, the document is legitimate. Your grandfather was of sound mind when he made these changes." "Was he?" Nathan turned to me, eyes narrowed. "What did you say to him, Olivia? How did you convince him to betray everything he built?" "I didn't know anything about this," I said, genuinely shocked. "I haven't even spoken to Grandpa about the company in years." "Right?" Nathan scoffed. "You were too busy playing at being a writer, pretending you weren't a Reynolds." His words stung, but they weren't entirely unfair. I had deliberately distanced myself from the family business, determined to succeed or fail on my own merits. "If I may," Mr. Pierce interjected, "there is a letter your grandfather left to be read in this event." He withdrew an envelope from his briefcase, breaking the seal with a silver letter opener. "My dear grandchildren," he began reading, "if you're hearing this, then the changes I've made to my will have come as a surprise, particularly to you, Nathan. This decision was not made lightly or hastily, but after careful consideration of the future of Reynolds Literary. Nathan, you have fulfilled every expectation I ever had for you in terms of business acumen. You understand the financial and operational aspects of publishing better than many industry veterans twice your age. But Reynolds Literary was never just a business to me. It was built on a passion for stories, for the written word, for ideas that challenge and transform. Olivia, your recent manuscript, yes, I knew E.L. Michaels was you, reminded me of why I started this company in the first place. Your gift for storytelling, your understanding of what moves readers. These are qualities that Reynolds Literary needs if it is to remain relevant in an industry that changes more rapidly each year. I am not choosing one of you over the other. I am giving Reynolds Literary what it needs, both of you working together, combining business savvy with creative vision. I have arranged matters to ensure that major decisions require both your approvals, making you true partners in this endeavor. Please do not view this as my final judgment on either of your worth, but rather as my last attempt to secure the future of something I've loved all my life. All my affection, Edward Reynolds. There was silence when Mr. Pierce finished reading. I stared at the table, stunned. Nathan had gone completely still. "This is ridiculous," he finally said, standing so abruptly his chair nearly toppled backward. "I'm contesting the will. My grandfather was clearly not in his right mind." "That is your prerogative, Mr. Reynolds," Pierce said calmly, "but I should inform you that your grandfather anticipated this reaction. He underwent 2 separate mental competency evaluations before making these changes and had the signing witnessed by 3 independent parties, including 2 physicians. It would be extremely difficult to successfully challenge this will." Nathan looked stricken. He turned to me, and for the first time in years, I could read his expression perfectly: betrayal. "Nathan," I started, but he cut me off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," he said. "Just don't." He gathered his copy of the will and left without another word. The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and introductions to the Reynolds Literary Board of Directors, most of whom regarded me with barely concealed skepticism. I couldn't blame them. I was an outsider, the granddaughter who had deliberately chosen a different path, now suddenly holding the largest stake in the company. Nathan avoided me entirely, communicating only through his assistant or lawyers. The company continued to function, but the tension was palpable. Longtime employees whispered in hallways, taking sides in a battle I hadn't asked for. A week after the reading of the will, I finally worked up the courage to visit my grandfather's office, still untouched since his passing. It was a magnificent space, wood-paneled and lined with first editions of books he had published over his 60-year career. I sat in his leather chair, running my fingers over the worn desk blotter, trying to understand what he had been thinking. Something caught my eye, a small key taped to the underside of the desk drawer with my name written on the tape in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. The key fit a locked drawer in his credenza, which contained a single item: a leather-bound journal. Inside were my grandfather's thoughts on books and authors he'd worked with, business decisions, family matters. The most recent entries detailed his concerns about Reynolds Literary, about how the company had gradually shifted from its original mission of publishing groundbreaking literature to focusing primarily on guaranteed commercial successes. One passage in particular made my heart skip. Watched Nathan present the quarterly strategy today. Brilliant analysis, stellar projections. Everything a CEO should deliver. Yet something was missing, that spark of genuine passion for what these books contain, not just what they can earn. Later received Olivia's manuscript through the general submission portal. She doesn't know I've always kept an eye on her literary career. Stayed up all night reading. It has flaws, certainly, but also that rare quality that makes you forget you're reading words on a page. It reminded me of why I started this company. Perhaps I've been nurturing the wrong successor all these years, or perhaps I've been thinking too narrowly about what Reynolds needs. I read through pages of his internal debate, his concern for Nathan's feelings balanced against his worries for the company's soul. The final entry was dated just 3 days before he changed his will. Had Reynolds been merely a financial enterprise, Nathan would be the perfect heir. Had it been purely a creative endeavor, perhaps Olivia. But it has always been both, and separating those aspects has never worked. The solution seems obvious now. They need each other, just as this business has always needed both commerce and art to survive. Nathan will resist. He sees compromise as weakness. Olivia may doubt herself. She's avoided responsibility in the family company for so long. But together, they might just create something greater than I ever could. Sometimes the wisest choice isn't choosing at all, but finding a way for opposing forces to strengthen rather than destroy each other. I closed the journal, my eyes stinging. My grandfather had seen something I had missed. that running from my family legacy wasn't the same as forging my own path. That evening, I did something I should have done days earlier. I drove to Nathan's apartment and took some notes. He looked surprised to see me when I opened the door, then immediately guarded. "What do you want, Olivia?" 5 minutes away from me, I said, holding up my grandfather's hand. "Please." Reluctantly, he stepped aside to let me in. His apartment was immaculate and organized, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves containing carefully organized first editions. The Reynolds family obsession none of us could entirely escape. "And I was in Grandpa's office," I said, placing the journal on his glass coffee table. "I think you should read it." Nathan eyed the book suspiciously. "Another posthumous manipulation." "Just the truth," I replied, "his real reasons, and he wasn't wrong, Nathan." "About what?" "About passing over me for someone who has never shown the slightest interest in the family business." I took a deep breath. "About the fact that Reynolds needs both of us, your business sense and my creative perspective. He saw something neither of us was willing to admit, that we're stronger together than apart." "That's a convenient position now that you have controlling interests," he said bitterly. "I don't want to control Reynolds Literary," I said. "I want to help restore its balance. When was the last time we published something truly groundbreaking, Nathan? Something that wasn't a guaranteed commercial success, but might actually change readers' lives." A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, crossed his face. "Read the journal," I said, moving toward the door. "Then, if you want to talk about the future of Reynolds, call me. If you still want to contest the will, well, that's your choice. But I don't think that's what Grandpa would have wanted. And I don't think it's what you want either, not really." 3 days later, my phone rang as I was making coffee in my small apartment. Nathan's name flashed on the screen. "I read it," he said without preamble when I answered. "And?" There was a long pause. He wasn't entirely wrong, Nathan finally admitted, the words sounding as if they'd been painfully extracted. "The company has drifted from its original mission." Another silence stretched between us. "I'm not giving up my role at Reynolds," he said firmly. "I wouldn't expect you to," I replied. "That's not what Grandpa wanted." "I don't know how to do this, Olivia." "How to share something I've always seen as mine." "I don't know how to help run a publishing company," I countered. "So I guess we both have things to learn." A week later, we held our first joint meeting with the Reynolds Literary Board. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife as Nathan and I took seats at opposite ends of the conference table. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly expecting a corporate civil war. Nathan cleared his throat, straightening his tie, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "For those who haven't heard, my sister and I have decided to honor our grandfather's wishes," he announced, his voice steadier than I expected. "Reynolds Literary will now be led by both of us, combining our respective strengths to build on Edward Reynolds' legacy." The surprise on the board members' faces would have been comical under different circumstances. "Our first initiative," I added, "will be launching a new imprint focused on discovering innovative voices in literature, alongside our established commercial lines. The Reynolds New Voices Initiative," Nathan continued, "will seek out authors who might be overlooked by traditional publishing metrics, but who bring fresh perspectives to contemporary literature." As the meeting progressed, I watched my brother gradually shift from stiff formality to genuine engagement. When he spoke about diversifying the company's digital strategy, I could hear echoes of our grandfather's passion beneath Nathan's analytical approach. Later, as we walked together toward the elevator, an awkward silence fell between us. "This isn't going to be easy," Nathan finally said. "We don't exactly have a history of working well together." "No," I agreed, "but we have something better." "What's that?" "A common purpose, and maybe more in common with each other than we've been willing to admit." 6 months later, I stood beside Nathan at the launch party for Reynolds New Voices, watching as authors, agents, and editors mingled in the renovated lobby of the Reynolds building. The space had been transformed, with our grandfather's original desk, the one from his garage where he'd started the company, taking pride of place in the center of the room. "He would have loved this," Nathan said quietly, nodding toward an animated discussion between a young debut author and a veteran editor. "Yes," I replied, "he would." My brother had changed over these months, not dramatically, but noticeably. He still approached everything with clinical precision, but he developed a genuine interest in the creative side of the business. Meanwhile, I had discovered an unexpected aptitude for certain aspects of publishing operations. We were still learning, still disagreeing, sometimes heatedly, but the company was stronger for it. The first books from our new imprint were generating critical buzz, while the commercial divisions continued to provide the financial backbone Nathan managed so expertly. That evening, after the guests had departed, I found myself alone in my grandfather's office, my office now, shared with Nathan. On the wall hung a newly framed piece, the first page of my grandfather's journal, displaying words that had become something of a mantra for us both. The worth of words lies not merely in what they earn, but in what they change. A truly successful book transforms both the reader and the world in which it exists. A truly successful publisher must do the same. Beneath it, in a frame of its own, was a note Nathan had found in his copy of the will, words our grandfather had written specifically for him. The measure of a man is not in what he controls, but in what he builds. Build something remarkable, Nathan. Sometimes that requires letting go of what you thought you wanted to grasp something you never imagined. I traced my fingers over my grandfather's handwriting, thinking about the legacy he left us, not just a company, but a challenge to be better together than we ever could have been apart. Out in a hallway, I could hear Nathan talking with the night security guard, his voice echoing slightly in the empty building. Two grandchildren, as different as could be, now united in purpose. Not because we'd suddenly become the same, but because we'd finally learned to value the differences that once drove us apart. Our grandfather's final lesson hadn't been about publishing at all, but about family, about how the bonds between us, complicated and sometimes painful as they might be, were ultimately what gave meaning to everything else. As Nathan appeared in the doorway, I smiled at my brother, really smiled, without reservation, perhaps for the first time in years. "Ready to go?" he asked, holding my coat. "Yes," I said. "I think I am."